If you're like me, you like to watch basketball players who look like you on the court, whose games slightly remind us of our own. For me, those guys are Kyrie, Steph, Jamal Crawford, Detroit's Isaiah Thomas, Boston's Isaiah Thomas. Basically anybody who's detrimentally short like me, but make up for it with incredible ball handling. Now the handle god we're talking about wasn't short, but in the 132-year history of basketball, he's easily top 5 all time when it comes to ball handling. This week's video is about basketball's first ever handle god, maybe the first Kyrie of the league, Pete Maravich. He was born June 22nd, 1947, into a family of basketball. His dad, Press, played in the National Basketball League for the Youngstown Bears. Thanks, NBA Boards. By the way, follow NBA Boards on Twitter. And he'd instill that professionalism and work ethic into Pete at just 7 years old, making his son dribble up the stairs. And when he got good enough at it, Press would give him a blindfold, and he'd have to keep dribbling up the stairs, giving him a feel for the ball like no one in the sport. His dad would drive Pete around town as he dribbled the ball out the window going down the road. Like most legends before him, young Pete was obsessed with the game, practicing all the time until his bag was an absolute enigma. He started on the school's varsity team a year before he was old enough to attend classes there in 1961. And then after practice, he'd go to NC State, where his dad coached, and practice with the college team. Basketball was all he cared about. He went to a few high schools in North and South Carolina, but in 1963, at Needham Broughton, people were noticing him shooting the ball from his side, like he was holding a revolver, and that's where his nickname, Pistol Pete, came from. His dad was hard on him, threatening Pistol Pete with his own .45 caliber if he ever drank or got into any trouble. So Pete stayed focused, and it was time to take his game to college. In 1965, Press Maravich took NC State to an ACC championship. The next year, he'd take a job at LSU, quickly offering his son a scholarship and telling him, if you don't sign this, don't ever come into my house again. Maravich wanted to play for West Virginia, but told his dad if he bought him a car, he'd go to LSU, and he was officially a Tiger. All Pete had to do to become the best player on campus is show up. He was already significantly better than everybody on that team, but he didn't play varsity his freshman year. Back then, the NCAA barred freshmen from playing varsity, so Pete would have to cook from the JV squad, which was a shame for the school because their varsity team could have used him, going 3-23 Pete's freshman year. They were so bad, nobody came to see them, but rules are rules, no matter how lame NCAA. And in Pete's freshman debut, he dropped 50 points, 14 boards, and 11 dimes against Southeastern Louisiana. It only took a few games for people to start noticing, and soon there wasn't an empty seat in the gym when he played. That is, until the varsity team took the court, because everybody left. Press Maravich said his first season at LSU was the toughest coaching situation he'd ever faced. But for the freshman team, things couldn't be better, with Maravich dropping more than 43 points a game and leading LSU to an undefeated season. Well, almost. In the last game of the year against Tennessee, it's a close one, and Pete's got a free throw to tie it up, but he would miss it. In the only game the team lost all season, in 1967, his sophomore year, he'd finally get a chance to help out the varsity team, and again dropped 43 points a game, helping them to a 14-12 record. Although LSU wasn't much of a championship contender, the national media couldn't get enough of Pistol Pete. They often talked about the Tigers' playing style, criticizing Press Maravich for running the offense almost exclusively through Pete. He had 50 shots in a game 8 times in his college career. He was the definition of a volume shooter because of the system his dad had built around him. It was the only way Press thought those teams could win games. That pressure Pete was under of scoring 40 plus a game sometimes got to him, though he almost never let it show or affect his game, shooting 43% from the field for his career. Pete's junior season, he couldn't stop scoring, improving to 44 points a game. But the team went 13-13 this year. Lots of people say Press was too worried about coaching his son rather than the team as a whole. Press said without Pete shooting 40 times a game, they can't win. Pete was not about that. He wanted to be more of a team player, but Press wanted to make sure people kept coming to games. The pressure of that father-son dynamic would haunt the team until graduation. But halfway through his senior season, January 31st, 1970, he officially passed Oscar Robinson as the greatest college scorer of all time. A week later, the Tigers head to Bama. where Pete would score 69 points, second most in the history of college basketball. Pete is all over this all-time list, dropping 60 points 4 times in his career, and 27 times he scored more than 50. In the game against Bama, he went 26 of 57 from the field and made 17 of his 21 free throws, but it wasn't enough as LSU dropped the game by 2 points to the Crimson Tide, 106 to 104. To this day, Maravich is the all-time leading scorer in college basketball, finishing with over 3,600 points. The record was almost broken last year, but it took Antoine Davis of Detroit Mercy 5 playing years to get 3 points shy of Pete's scoring record. And only 3 years of Pete's points were counted toward that record because Maravich played on the freshman team his first year. But if you count that year's points, Maravich dropped 4,000 on college basketball. Undeniably the greatest college scorer we've ever seen. He led the Tigers to 22-10 his last year in school, establishing himself as one of, if not the greatest college basketball player ever. He set 12 records, dropped 64 times, had 50 27 times. He dropped 44 points for 3 years straight in an era of basketball with no three-point line. Back in his day, the three-point line was only used in the American Basketball Association. The NCAA wouldn't adopt the line for all teams until 1986, but LSU coach Dale Brown went back and charted Pete's shots throughout his career, and he found that if the three-point line had existed when Maravich played, he would have averaged 57 points a game, and he was just getting started in basketball. Pete had several options coming out of college. He had offers from the American Basketball Association teams, the NBA, and even the Harlem Globetrotters. But he'd settle with the NBA, and with the third pick in the 1970 NBA draft, the Atlanta Hawks select Pete Maravich out of Louisiana State University. This was a good Hawks team. They just lost the finals to the Lakers, but had the best record in the league the year prior to drafting Maravich. Pete signed a $1.5 million contract, but his new teammates were getting about $60,000 a year in an environment where there was already a lot of friction between players and management. Hawks players were resentful of Maravich coming in with endorsements and all this money without having played a game yet. And what made things worse to start his career is Pete would listen to his dad's basketball advice over Atlanta coach Richie Guerin. I'm not sure how you say that, sorry Richie. Those close to him said it really hurt his professional career. His team wasn't winning, and in Maravich's 4 years with Atlanta, they never won a playoff series. Individually though, Maravich was magical, and would make 2 All-Star teams in his first 4 years with Atlanta. But at the end of the day, the Hawks weren't getting anywhere in the postseason, and they decided to trade him to the New Orleans Jazz in 1974, a big change in his career. And 5 months later, things would get so much worse. Pete's mom had battled alcoholism and depression her whole life, and after his father left LSU for Appalachian State, his mother committed suicide, absolutely devastating Pete, reinforcing even more disinterest in the professional game of basketball. He had been through so much in life, and basketball was now a job, with the immense pressure of being the show every night he stepped on the court. He'd sometimes wait hours after games to avoid talking to the press. Basketball was no longer a haven of identity for Maravich. He started drinking to escape the pressures of both selling the game and winning. And although he had a good year with 21 points a game, the Jazz ended up with a worst in the league record of 23-59. He came back strong in his second season with the Jazz with almost 26 points a game, but they again would miss the playoffs because the Jazz hadn't organized any talent around Maravich, limiting them to a 38-44 record in 1975. The next year, Pete got the pistol out and shot 31 points a game, leading the NBA and making his 3rd All-Star game, not to mention his highest scoring game of his career, 68 points against the New York Knicks. The best season of his career, he was ready to lead his team into their first taste of success, and in the 1977 season, they were on track to make the playoffs, until January 31st, when he came down on his knee and partially tore a ligament, changing his game forever, and the Jazz would again miss the playoffs. In the next 2 years, Pete would score like he always did, but dealt with several injuries, missing 32 games in the 77-78 season, and 33 the next. So the Jazz would waive Pete Maravich. He was then picked up by the Boston Celtics, where he came off the bench for the first time in his life. He averaged 12 points a game. It bothered him a lot coming off the bench, and one day he called Celtics coach Bob Fitch and quit. He finished his career averaging over 24 points a game and was a 5-time All-Star. He was also named to the NBA's 50-year anniversary team. So in 1980, Pete retired from basketball, and he kind of became a recluse. His entire life he worked to accomplish greatness at basketball, and having done that, he wondered if he'd done enough. Like so many athletes who leave their games, he didn't know where to turn or what to do next. He developed a paranoia, thinking people were around him to use him, and eventually struggled with suicidal thoughts. After Pete had spent 2 weeks without leaving the house, his wife convinced him to get some help, so Maravich dedicated his life to Christianity, even signing autographs with the scripture Philippians 4:13. Once he tackled his demons of retirement, he and his dad started running basketball camps in the summer, until eventually Press's health took a downturn, and he was diagnosed with bone cancer. Pete was with his dad for the rest of his life, taking care of him through hospice. But on April 15, 1987, his dad passed away at 71 years old. 8 months later, Pete was playing pickup basketball at a church when he collapsed to the floor. His high school jersey had just been retired at a ceremony the week before, and his friends said he didn't look right, and on January 5th, 1988, in that church, Pete Maravich died of heart failure. He was 40 years old. Doctors later did an autopsy revealing Pete was missing a left artery in his heart, and doctors said he shouldn't have lived past 20. Rest in peace, Pistol Pete Maravich, basketball's first handle god.